G'day, my name is Emma Bennett. I'm an ecologist from Australia and I've been working on wind farm and wildlife impact since 2005. Some of you may know me from my use of detection dogs at wind farms and my advocacy in that field, and others may have seen my presentation at Scotland where I looked at alternative ways to allocate resources to get better impacts on wind and wildlife impacts at wind farms. Today I'm about to talk to you about simple curtailment in Australia and how we can compromise between bat mortality and energy production even when we don't have all the information we need. And this will be particularly useful in developing countries or in places where the ecological knowledge on bats is not as good as what it may be in North America or in Europe. So let's talk about the bat impacts we've been having in Southeast Australia. There are around 16 insectivorous little microbats in my part of the world and 2 fruit bats that are found in the state of Victoria where I live. 13 of these have been identified as collision victims. That's 11 of the small bats and both fruit bats. And this also includes the endangered southern bent-winged bat and the vulnerable grey-headed flying fox. Of all of these though, only the white-striped free-tailed bat has been found impacted at every single wind farm across the state. And the number of white-striped free-tailed bats that we are finding is higher than all of the birds combined. So we're looking at around about 7 to 11 bats per turbine that are impacted, and 4 to 6 of these will be this single species, the white-striped free-tail. So we have just over 2,000 turbines in this state that are approved, under construction or in planning, and about 1,000 of them have already been built and are operational. And so this works out somewhere between 14 and 22,000 bats that we will potentially kill each year. Now, whilst these numbers may not seem as extreme as what we see in the Northern Hemisphere, where we have mass populations of cave-dwelling bats, these are small populations of bats that live in populations of up to 200-300, we're not really sure, and are scattered across farmlands, roosting in trees, and not living in large populations. So of that 14 to 22,000, somewhere between 8 and 12,000 of them will be this single species. And this is it here. You can see in the picture, the white-striped free-tail with its clearly distinctive white stripes. You can't see the tail, but you can certainly see it's a boy. And it is definitely one of my favourite bats. So bats are really important because they consume at least half their body weight in insects every night when they're feeding. And they are nature's best pest controller. They play a really important role in agriculture, and without them, the money that farmers would have to spend on pest control, well, it's been estimated in the US at being around $23 billion annually just in pesticide. So they are critical for a healthy, balanced ecosystem. So we know that curtailment is a proven method. There have been studies that have done across Europe and in North America that have shown that changing the cut-in speed will reduce bat fatalities. And we know that bat activity is substantially correlated with wind speed. When the wind blows fast, bats don't fly. So a substantial proportion of the bat fatalities actually occur at their low wind speeds when energy production is also low. So we looked at creating this study to investigate whether curtailment would work in Australia because it hadn't been proven. And we chose a small wind farm with 11 turbines because it had shown an impact to one of our critically endangered bats. So prior to our study, the turbine cut-in speed was around 3 metres per second. There was no government incentive for them to trial curtailment. It was the goodwill of the company themselves. And they wanted some evidence to be able to share with their management team that they would be reducing their impact to this critically endangered species. Now, because numbers were so low, we chose to look at all bats and look at the effect of how changing cut-in speed will affect mortality on all bats. So we put out 4 Anabat recorders throughout the wind farm footprint so we could measure activity during both the before and after. All 11 turbines were surveyed by trained detection dogs twice weekly. Dogs were obtaining around about 95% detection. So we had a good chance of finding everything that we looked for. And we did this from January to April, which is our summer through to our autumn. So in 2019, the following year, we changed the cut-in speed to 4.5 metres per second. The reason why this number was chosen was it was a good compromise between what we wanted as ecologists, arguing for up to 7, and what the company was prepared to trial, given that there had been no incentive for them to actually do this. And again, we repeated the study. All 11 turbines were searched and train detection dogs were there twice weekly. We started a little bit earlier in 2019. That was purely because we had a little bit of trouble getting our permits through in 2018 to commence. So we had a few extra surveys in our after trial. So down the bottom, you can see in that table there that we found 30 bats in the first year, and we found 16 in the second year with an increased survey effort. And so here's our results. So if we look at the background activity to see if whether each year is comparable, you can see that there is very little difference between each of the months. And in fact, potentially in April, there may have been a slightly higher amount of activity in our second year. But ultimately, what we can say is that activity in and around the wind farm was similar between both years. So there is likely to be a similar number of bats available to be impacted. And here's the results of our carcass detection. So if we look at the graph at the top, we can see quite clearly that there were more finds found before we commenced the trial and then after. So the change in cut-in speed, it looks like it has had a reduction. And when we looked at those numbers in a bit more detail, we found that if we took the entire wind farm site as a study area, we were finding 1 bat every time on average in 2018, each time we turned up to do the survey, twice weekly. However, in 2019, we weren't. We were finding 1 bat every 2 surveys, or as the table says, half a bat each time we went out there. So ultimately what we found is we had a 46% reduction in bat mortality. And given the ecology of the bats really similar across all the sites of Victoria, it is the white-striped freetail is our #1 impacted. They are the same species across quite a large range. We can suggest that that would probably be similar for the same cut-in speed across the site. But interestingly, with this small change, what we found is our lost energy generation was 0.16% of the annual generation, and lost revenue only 0.09%. Not even 0.1% of the revenue was lost, with a 46% reduction in bat mortality. Now, obviously, this is site-specific and it depends on the wind profile. But in Australia, providers don't make as much money overnight because wind energy costs more money during the day. And because we're only looking at this small 3 metres to 4.5 metres per second, it's not a huge contribution to the annual generation. So what we can say is we know that wind turbines kill bats. There have been countless studies around the world and we are all coming up with the same results globally. We know that small increments in cut-in speed during these warm summer months can reduce bat impacts by many thousands of individuals a year if we're halving the impact we're having. And production loss, whilst it's site-specific, curtailment may be a really easy solution on sites that have that similar nighttime profile, where the wind isn't generally blowing as high in those periods. So I have been urging all operators around Australia to evaluate their energy loss if they were to raise the cut-in speed from 4.5 metres per second from the late summer to late autumn period for around 3 months, just dusk till dawn. And this works out at about 10% of potential production time. So any reduction in bat impacts now will absolutely reduce the long-term population effects that are associated with wind farm development. And we know there are more turbines coming. There are going to be more impacts. So what can we do now to slow this while we come up with some better solutions? And so future studies which might customise for smart curtailment or to minimise the production loss and maximise bat survival could be done whilst we are giving ourselves some more time through these small changes in cut-in speed. So if we look at the cost of monitoring a turbine in Australia, estimates are somewhere between $20,000 and $120,000 with quite different conditions put on different wind farms. And so the price does vary quite a lot, but somewhere between $20,000 and $120,000 per turbine to monitor. And this small change that we did, whilst its curtailment would be happening for 10% of the annual time, which is nighttime only for 3 months, this actually equated at this site to 0.16% of production loss. And again, because energy is cheaper overnight, it's not the high price, this turned out to only be 0.09% of revenue. Now, if all 2,000 turbines adopted a similar policy to this, we could save up to 11,000 bats per year. Now, if this was any other native species, something more iconic or something that people are cozy and comfortable with, this would be a no-brainer. We would implement this immediately. So my take-home message from this presentation is small increments in cut-in speed will reduce bat impacts. Any reduction in bat deaths will provide more time to discuss mitigation, smart curtailment, and the long-term population effects of the bat deaths. And so waiting for information on bat ecology and behaviour will continue to result in maximum bat deaths. We know that curtailment works. We know that small changes reduce bat deaths. Whilst they might not reduce them completely, any reduction at this stage is good for bat survival. And because we know it works, we should be obliged to implement it, not just here in Australia, not just in Europe, where they do a very good job of it, but globally. And so small changes, changing that cut-in speed for that small period of time, should be considered a mandatory thing to do for a good company that wants to have good pride in the way they're looking after their animals. So I just want to thank my project partners. I worked with Biosis to collect the activity data. Symbolics, which you'll be speaking as well at this conference, did all my analysis for me, and Pacific Hydro was the company that gave me the benefit of the doubt and allowed me to trial curtailment and have adopted this policy at this site moving into the future. You can see my references there. If you'd like to contact me for further information, my email is there. If you'd like to discuss this project or anything to do with detection dogs or our alternative methods of allocating resources, please feel free to contact me. Thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed my presentation.